200 fighters walked into that gym. 199 of them hit the canvas before they understood what was happening to them. The toughest man in the room, the one nobody had ever put down, lasted 6 seconds. I spent 30 years on the mats. I've been hit by men who could end a fight with one hand. So believe me when I tell you, what happened in that gym shouldn't have been possible. And the strangest part isn't that he lost. It's what he did after. He walked out that night and never fought again. Not because his body was broken. Because of what those 6 seconds showed him. Pull up a chair. This one you need to hear all the way through. Oakland. The tail end of the 1960s. There was a gym off a side street that didn't have a sign out front. If you knew, you knew. If you didn't, you walked right past it. I want you to smell it first, because that's how I remember it. Old rope. Leather worn soft by 1,000 hands. And underneath all of it, sweat. The kind that soaks into the wood floor over the years, until the building itself smells like effort. You walked in, and the air told you men had bled in here. The light came from above. Hard bulbs hung over the ring, and everything outside that circle of light sat in shadow. The bleachers ran along one wall, old wooden planks that creaked when the crowd leaned forward. And that night, they leaned forward a lot. Here's how the story goes, and I've heard it told a dozen ways by men who swore they were there. A rumor had been moving through the fight circles for weeks. There was a man taking on all comers. Small man, half the size of the heavyweights, who came looking for him, and he was making them an offer. Last 90 seconds. That was it. 90 seconds on the clock against him, and you walked away with the money. Didn't have to win. Didn't have to land a punch. Just stay on your feet, stay in the fight, for a minute and a half. To a room full of fighters, that sounded like free money. 90 seconds against a man you outweighed by 80, 90, 100 pounds? Most of them figured they could do it in their sleep. That's the thing about an offer the good. Nobody stops to ask why a man would make it. They just see the money. By the time the sun went down, the place was packed. Word had traveled. Men in suits sat shoulder to shoulder with men still in their work clothes. Money was already changing hands in the crowd before a single punch was thrown. And somewhere in all of that, over by the ropes, where nobody bothered to look, there was a young man with a camera. We'll get to him. He matters more than anyone in that building knew. But first, you need to understand the man everyone came to see win, because he was a monster. And I mean that as a compliment. They called him the champion, and for once, it wasn't an exaggeration. He was the kind of big that changes the temperature of a room. 6'4", maybe more. 260 pounds, and not soft pounds, the kind that came from breaking other men for a living. His hands were the size of dinner plates. I've shaken hands with men like that. You feel your own bones do the math. And he was undefeated. Not. Mostly won. Not. A couple close calls. Undefeated. He had put down every man who'd ever stood across from him, and most of them didn't last long enough to make it interesting. He didn't fight. He demolished. Now here's where I have to be fair to him, because the easy thing is to make him a cartoon. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't slow. A man doesn't go undefeated by being clumsy. He was fast for his size. He hit like a truck. And he'd been doing this long enough to know every trick a smaller man might try. But he had one problem. And it wasn't his body. He was loud. He talked before fights. He talked during them. He laughed at the men across from him, told the crowd what he was about to do, played to the bleachers like the whole thing was theater. And the crowd ate it up, because winners get to be loud. Nobody questions a man who keeps proving himself right. I've known 100 fighters like him over the years. And I'll tell you something I learned the hard way. The loud ones are afraid first. They just make noise so they don't have to hear it. He didn't know that about himself yet. That night, he'd find out. When he heard about the little man and the 90-second offer, he laughed harder than anyone. To him, it was insulting. A grown man, a real fighter, getting beaten by some lightweight half his size? It couldn't happen. It wasn't physics. And the money on the table just made it sweeter. So he made his own bet. Loud, in front of everyone, so there'd be no taking it back. $2,000. In 1969, that wasn't pocket change. That was a car. That was months of a working man's pay, stacked up and put down on a table under the ring lights. $2,000 said he'd last 90 seconds. And the way he saw it, he wasn't betting on lasting. He was betting on how badly he'd hurt the little man before the clock even mattered. The crowd roared. The money sat there on the table, weighted down by a stopwatch so it wouldn't blow off. He had no idea he'd never pick it back up. Fire. While the big man worked the crowd, the door at the back of the gym opened, and the man everyone came to beat walked in. You almost missed him. That's the first thing people said about that night. He came in quiet, no entourage, no show. He was lean. Maybe 135 pounds soaking wet. Next to the heavyweights warming up by the ring, he looked like he'd wandered into the wrong building. He didn't talk. He didn't play to the bleachers. He set his bag down, rolled his shoulders once, and looked at the ring the way a carpenter looks at a piece of wood. Not nervous. Not excited. Just measuring. I've stood across from men like that, and I'll tell you, it's the quiet ones that should scare you. The loud man is telling you everything he's going to do. The quiet man is already done thinking about it. He's just waiting for you to catch up. The crowd didn't see it. They laughed. Of course they laughed. Here was this slim young man who'd offered to pay them for 90 seconds of their time, and he didn't look like he could last 90 seconds against a strong wind. The bets in the bleachers swung hard. Money piled up against him. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he noticed and just didn't care. He pulled off his jacket, and underneath, there wasn't an ounce of waste on him. Every line of him was built for one thing. But you had to know what you were looking at to see it, and nobody in that room did. Except one person. Over by the ropes, in the worst seat in the house, there was a kid. Couldn't have been more than 19, 20 years old. He had a camera around his neck, an old film camera, the kind where every shot cost you, so you learned to wait for the right one. He'd talked his way in somehow, told somebody he was shooting for a paper. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Nobody cared. He was nobody. But while the whole room was laughing at the small man, the kid wasn't laughing. He was watching. He'd raised that camera the second the man walked in, and he didn't put it down. Something about the way the man moved had caught him. He couldn't have told you what. He just knew, the way a photographer knows, that this was worth the film. Remember him? Because everything you and I know about that night, every detail I'm telling you, survived because that kid kept his eye on the right man when everyone else was looking the wrong way. Now the room wanted the show to start. The big champion was getting impatient, pacing, calling out, asking the little man if he'd written his will. The crowd loved it. And the small man finally spoke. Just once. He looked at the stack of money on the table, then up at the giant, and he said something quiet. The people close enough to hear it said it wasn't a threat. It wasn't bravado. He just said, 90 seconds. Whenever you're ready. That was all. No insult back. No promise. Just the offer, laid flat on the table like the cash. And here's the thing about a man who doesn't insult you back. It gets under the skin worse than any insult could. The giant had built his whole career on rattling men before the bell. He'd talk, they'd talk back, and somewhere in that noise he already won half the fight. But you can't rattle silence. There's nothing to push against. You could see it on the big man's face. Just for a second. A flicker. He didn't understand why this little man wasn't afraid, and not understanding made him angry. And angry is loud. And loud, as I told you, is afraid wearing a costume. So they set the terms. 1 round. 90 seconds on the clock. The big man had to stay in the fight, stay on his feet, for 90 seconds, and the money was his. 2,000 of his own dollars on the table, plus whatever the little man was putting up to make it worth the trouble. Simple. Clean. A child could understand it. A man held up the stopwatch so the crowd could see it. The same stopwatch that had been pinning the money down all night. He clicked it once to show it worked, then reset it. 90 seconds. That was the whole world now. 90 seconds was the distance between the giant and the easiest $2,000 he'd ever make. The two of them stepped into the ring. The ropes were old and they sagged, and when the big man leaned back into them, they groaned under his weight. The little man stood in the center, loose, hands low, weight balanced like he might just as easily have been waiting for a bus. The crowd went quiet, not all at once. It rolled across the room, front to back, as people realized this was actually about to happen. The laughter died down into something tighter. You could hear the bulbs humming over the ring. By the ropes, the kid braced his elbows on the edge of the canvas and put his eye to the camera. He had a limited number of frames. He couldn't waste a single one. So he made himself a promise. He wouldn't shoot until it mattered. He nearly didn't get the chance, because what was coming wouldn't last long enough to think. Somebody called out to start the clock, and the giant pushed off the ropes. Now, I told you the giant was the last man to step in that ring. I didn't tell you about the ones who came before him. Because to understand what those 6 seconds meant, you have to see what the little man had already done that night, over and over, while the crowd slowly stopped laughing. The big champion didn't go first. He was smart enough to want to see the little man work before he put his own money down. So he sat back, arms folded, and let the others test the water. The first man up was a wrestler, thick through the neck and shoulders, the kind of grip that could fold a steel chair. His whole plan, you could see it from the bleachers, was simple. Get hold of the little man, take him to the ground, and let 90 seconds bleed away while he laid on top of him like a fallen tree. Smart. Safe. He didn't need to hurt anybody. He just needed to hold on. He never got the grip. He lunged, those big arms wide open, and the little man wasn't there anymore. Not far. That's what the wrestler couldn't understand afterward. He hadn't run away. He'd moved maybe a foot. Just enough. The arms closed on air, and by the time the wrestler turned to find him, the little man had already touched him twice. Light, quick, almost polite, in two places that took the strength right out of him. He went down to one knee, confused, and the room laughed because they thought it was a stumble. It wasn't a stumble. He just couldn't get back up the way he wanted to. 11 seconds. The wrestler had lasted 11 seconds. The crowd still thought it was a fluke. Second man was a brawler. None of that grappling nonsense. He came out throwing big looping punches meant to take a head off. And here's what stayed with everybody who watched. The little man didn't block. He didn't cover up. He just wasn't where the punches landed. Every swing found the spot the man had been standing in a half second before. The brawler chased a ghost around that ring, swinging at the air, getting slower, getting wilder, until his own momentum spun him half around, and a single open hand tapped him at the base of the skull, and his legs simply forgot their job. Down. 9 seconds. The laughter in the bleachers had a different sound to it now. Thinner. People were starting to lean forward instead of back. Third man thought he'd been clever. He'd watched the first two and decided the problem was that they'd committed. They'd attacked, and attacking is how the little man got you. He used your own move against you. So this one decided he wouldn't attack at all. He'd just stay back. Circle. Run out the clock without ever giving the little man something to work with. 90 seconds of dancing. That was the plan. It's not a bad plan. I've used it myself against men I had no business fighting. The trouble is, it only works if the other man needs you to come to him. He didn't. The little man walked him down. Calm, unhurried, cutting off the ring one step at a time, herding him toward the ropes the way you'd guide an animal into a pen. And the third man, the clever one, he felt the ropes touch his back, and he panicked, because now there was nowhere left to circle. He threw one desperate punch just to make space. That was the mistake. That was the only thing the little man had been waiting for. One punch. One opening. It was over before the man's arm was even all the way out. 6, no. Not 6 yet. Save that. Let's call it 7 seconds. The clever man lasted 7. By now, nobody was laughing. I want you to picture the room, because this is the part the kid by the ropes was photographing. He still hadn't taken his shot. He was waiting, just like he promised himself. But he was watching the crowd as much as the ring now, and what he saw in their faces was the thing worth remembering. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was confusion. Pure, deep confusion. These were fight people. They'd spent their whole lives around violence. They knew what it looked like when a big man beat a small one, and they knew what it looked like when a small man got lucky. This was neither. There was no luck in it. The little man wasn't getting away with anything. He was choosing, every single time, exactly how and exactly when each fight ended. And he was doing it so fast and so quietly that the mind couldn't keep up. That's the thing people never tell you about real skill. It doesn't look impressive. It looks easy. It looks like cheating. The harder something actually is, the more effortless it appears when a master does it. And the crowd that night was watching the hardest thing in the world look like a man swatting flies. Man after man went up. A boxer with hands so fast you couldn't follow them, down in 10 seconds, never landed clean. A barroom bruiser who'd never lost a street fight in his life, 8 seconds, and he sat in the corner afterward just staring at his own hands like they'd betrayed him. A young hopeful, all heart, who actually charged back in after he'd been put down, and the little man let him up, which was almost worse, because then he had to put him down again. And here's what I keep coming back to all these years later. Not one of those men was badly hurt. Think about that. 12, 2 dozen men, and the little man could have crippled every one of them. The wrestler's arm, the boxer's jaw, the clever man's throat. He had them all, and he took none of them. He turned each man off like a light switch and set him down gently. He wasn't there to break people. He was there to prove a point. And the point was getting clearer with every man who fell. The point was this: size is not an argument. It's a target. I've said that to young fighters my whole life and watched them nod without believing me. They believe it when they meet a man like this. When the biggest, strongest version of themselves walks into a room and gets put down by someone who never even breathed hard. There's no arguing with that. The body learns what the mind refuses to. Somewhere in that long line of falling men, the count had climbed. People were keeping track now, calling it out. 90, 100 more. The numbers got passed around the gym wrong and exaggerated the way they always do, until the legend would later swell it to 200. Maybe it was. Maybe it was 40. I wasn't counting heads, and neither was anyone honest. What I know is this: every man who walked up that night walked back down within seconds, and the little man in the center of the ring was still standing exactly where he'd started, breathing easy, hands low, waiting. And across the gym, sitting on his bench with his arms folded, the giant had stopped smiling. That's the moment I'd give anything to have seen myself. The moment the loud man went quiet. Because up until then, he'd been telling himself a story. Cheap tricks. Lucky timing. These men were fools. They were committing too hard. They didn't know how to fight a smaller man. He had an excuse ready for every single one of them. But excuses are like money. You can only spend so many before you're broke. And one by one, the giant had spent them all. The wrestler was no fool. The boxer was no fool. The clever man had done everything right and still ended up on the canvas. The giant had run out of reasons why it wouldn't happen to him. And that's when the fear came. Not before. The loud man is brave right up until the excuses run out. Then he's just a man in a quiet room with $2,000 on the table and no story left to tell himself. He could have walked away. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for what comes later. He could have stood up, laughed it off, said the little man was something special and there was no shame in it. The crowd would have grumbled, but they'd have let it go. Nobody was forcing him into that ring. But you can't do that when you're the loud one. When you've spent your whole life being the biggest voice in every room, walking away isn't an option, because the silence afterward would be louder than any beating. He'd built a cage out of his own reputation, and now it was pushing him toward the ropes. So he stood up. The whole room felt it. The benches creaked as he rose, and the noise of the crowd dropped away to nothing, because everyone understood that the warm-up was over. All those other men, they were the opening act. This was the reason they come. The undefeated giant against the little man who hadn't lost a step all night. He walked to the table. He looked down at his own $2,000 sitting under that stopwatch. And then he did the thing that told you everything about him. He looked at the crowd, not at his opponent, at the crowd, and he forced the old grin back onto his face, and he said something loud about how the little man must be getting tired by now. But the kid by the ropes was close enough to see his eyes, while his mouth was making jokes. And the eyes weren't joking. The eyes had already done the math the mind wouldn't admit. The little man, for his part, didn't react at all. He'd put down 24 men, and he stood there like he'd been waiting in a doctor's office. He just looked at the giant, the same flat, measuring look he'd given the empty ring when he first walked in. Like the giant was a piece of wood, and he was deciding where the grain ran. The man with the stopwatch raised his hand. The giant stepped through the ropes, and they screamed under his weight, and the whole ring tilted toward him like the room itself was bracing. By the ropes, the kid wound his film one last click. This was it. This was the shot he'd been saving every frame for. He pressed his eye to the viewfinder and put his finger on the shutter, and he waited, because a photographer's whole art is knowing that the moment hasn't come yet, and then knowing, in the space of a heartbeat, that it has. The hand dropped. Somebody yelled to start the clock, and the stopwatch began to tick. The giant came off the ropes like a landslide. I've been in front of that. A big man closing the distance, all the weight behind him, and your whole body screams one thing: move. He led with a right hand that could have ended the night by itself, thrown with everything he had, because somewhere underneath the noise he already knew he wouldn't get a second one. The loud ones always swing the hardest first. It's the fear, coming out as force. The little man saw it before it left the ground. 1. The punch started, and the little man's weight shifted. Not a dodge. Not yet. Just a settling, the way water settles before it moves. 2. He stepped. Inside. Toward the giant, not away, into the path of all that weight, which is the last place anyone with sense would go. And that's the whole secret, right there, in that one impossible step. He didn't avoid the force. He walked underneath it, to the one place where 260 pounds of momentum couldn't reach him. 3. The giant's punch passed over his shoulder and found nothing, and now all the weight was committed, traveling, with nothing to hit. A body that big can't call back a punch like that. It's a freight train past the platform. And the little man was already inside, already home, already where he decided to be before the giant ever moved. 4. I've stood close enough to a strike like the one that came next to feel the wind of it. I'll tell you what the body does. There's a sound the air makes, and then there's the part of you that knew, a half second too late, that you were never in this fight at all. His hand found the giant's throat. Open. Precise. Not a punch, a placement. Exactly hard enough. Not 1 ounce more. 5. The giant stopped. All of him. That enormous body just stopped, like the floor had been pulled out from under the idea of him. His hands came up toward his own throat, not to fight anymore, just to understand. His eyes went wide, and every person in that gym, all the way to the back row, understood in the same instant that it was over. 6. He went down. Not knocked out. That's what nobody expected. He went down conscious, down on his knees, one hand on the canvas and one hand at his throat, looking up at a man half his size, who hadn't moved more than 3 feet the entire time. Still breathing easy, still calm, looking down at him without a trace of triumph on his face. 6 seconds. And in that exact instant, the kid by the ropes pressed the shutter. 1 frame. The only one he took. The giant on his knees, the little man standing over him, neither of them moving. He'd waited the whole night, every other man falling unphotographed, because some part of him knew none of those were the picture. This was the picture. The instant a man stops being the thing he thought he was. The room didn't roar. That's the part people always get wrong when they tell it. There was no explosion of noise. There was silence. A whole gym full of fight people, and you could have heard a coin drop on that canvas. Because cheering is what you do when your man wins. Nobody's man had one. Something had happened that didn't fit any of the stories they'd brought with them, and the only honest response to it was quiet. Nobody breathed. And the little man, he didn't celebrate. He stepped back, gave the giant room, and waited. He'd turned off a man like a light, the same as all the others, and taken nothing he didn't need to take. Now, here's where most people end the story. The little man won, the giant fell, 6 seconds, roll the legend. But you and I both know the fall isn't the story. The story is what a man does after he hits the floor. So stay with me, because this is the part that earns all the rest. The giant knelt there for a long moment, longer than he needed to. His throat worked fine. The little man had made sure of that. He could have stood up right away. He didn't. And the people close to swore it wasn't because he was hurt. It was because he didn't know who was going to stand up. The man who knelt down was undefeated. Whoever got up was going to be something else. When he finally rose, he didn't look angry. Everyone braced for the rage. The loud man humiliated. That's a dangerous animal. It didn't come. He stood, and he looked at the little man, And then he did something that nobody in that gym ever forgot. He nodded. Once. Slow. The nod of a man conceding something much bigger than a fight. Then he walked to the table. His own $2,000 sat there under the stopwatch, where it had been all night. By every rule of the bet, it was the little man's money now. But the giant stood over it for a second, and he didn't pick it up to hand it over, and he didn't try to take it back. He just looked at it, the way you'd look at something that used to mean a great deal and suddenly meant nothing. And he left it there. He turned and walked out of that gym and didn't take a dollar, his or anyone's. He walked out into the Oakland night, and as far as the story goes, he never fought another man for the rest of his life. Now, let me be careful here, because this is where it matters most. People love to say the little man broke him, that he humiliated the giant, took his pride, ended his career. That's the cheap version, and it's wrong, and it misses the whole point. Humiliation is a weapon for small men. The little man never reached for it. He could have made the giant suffer in front of that whole crowd, could have dragged it out, played to the room, paid back every loud word. He didn't. Strength doesn't humiliate. Strength finishes, and then it lets you keep your feet. He took the giant's belief, and he left the giant his dignity. Those are different things, and the difference is everything. The giant didn't quit because he was beaten. Men get beaten and come back all the time. He quit because for 6 seconds he saw clearly. He'd spent his whole life believing that being the biggest and the loudest in the room was the same as being the strongest. And in 6 seconds a man half his size showed him they were never the same thing at all. You can't unsee that. Once you know the ground you've been standing on isn't real, you can't go back to standing on it. That's not a broken man. That, in its own strange way, is a man set free. He just paid a steep price for it, in front of a full house. The crowd filed out quiet that night. They'd come to see a giant win, and they'd seen something they didn't have words for, and most of them wouldn't, not for years. The little man packed his bag, the same as he'd come in, and slipped out without a sound. And the money? The legend says the money stayed on that table half the night before anyone had the nerve to touch it. But the kid with the camera, he walked home through the dark with one frame of film that was worth more than everything else he'd ever shot, and he didn't even know it yet. What he did with that photograph, where it went, who saw it, and how it nearly cost him everything, well, that's a story for another night. Now, let's sit with this a minute, you and me. Let me take the storyteller's hat off and tell you, as a man who spent 30 years on the mats, why this actually worked. No mysticism. No magic. Straight. First, the mechanics. That step inside. That's the whole thing, and almost nobody does it, because every instinct in your body fights it. A big man throws a heavy punch, and that punch has a place where it's deadliest, the end of its reach, where all the speed and weight arrive together. Most men, when they retreat straight back, right into that kill zone, just a little late. The little man went the other way. He stepped inside the arc, toward the shoulder, to the dead spot where the punch has no power because it hasn't finished traveling. From there, The biggest man in the world is just a big body with his weight going the wrong way. The throat strike isn't even hard. It doesn't need to be. The throat doesn't care how big you are. Second, the psychology, and this is the part one want you to really hear. Why did the giant break first, when the wrestler and the boxer and all the rest took their beating and lived? Because the giant had the most to lose that wasn't his body. The others lost a fight. The giant lost an idea, the idea he'd built his entire self on. The bigger the story a man tells about himself, the harder the floor when it goes. That's why the loud ones fall hardest. Not because they're weaker, because they're carrying more that isn't real, and all of it comes down at once. I've watched it my whole life. The quiet fighter loses and shrugs and trains tomorrow. The loud one loses once, clean, in front of everybody, and something goes out of him that doesn't come back. The noise was never confidence. The noise was the cost of holding the fear down. And the day the fear gets out, the noise has nothing left to do. Third, the honest part. Did it really happen this way? 200 men, 6 seconds, $2,000 on a table in Oakland. Here's what I'll tell you. The shape of it is true the way these things are true. A small man humbling a room full of bigger men. That's not invention. That's the oldest true story in the fighting world. And Bruce Lee lived closer to it than most legends ever get. The numbers grew in the telling, the way numbers do. Maybe it was 200. Maybe it was 20. Maybe the giant left his money. Maybe he came back for it the next morning when nobody was looking. I wasn't there, and neither was anyone who'll swear to it straight. But I'll tell you what I believe, and I've earned the right to believe it. The lesson under the legend is real, whether the legend got every number right or not. Size is not an argument. It's a target. The loud man is afraid first, and the strongest thing a fighter can do when he's got a bigger man helpless in front of a crowd is take the win and leave the man his dignity. That's not a story about a punch. The punch took 6 seconds. The story took the rest of that giant's life. So the next time you're in a room with somebody who's the biggest voice in it, telling everyone how it's going to go, filling the air so there's no space left to doubt him, watch that man closely. Watch his eyes while his mouth is making jokes. Somewhere underneath all the noise, he already knows. They always do. Take care of yourself. And don't ever mistake the loud thing for the strong one. I'll see you next time.